Hello everyone, this is Dylan with Beyond the Emulator, and I wanted to share today this video tutorial regarding the Trimui Brick and the NextUI custom firmware. I was going to go over the front-end emulator that is used for the Game Boy Advance platform on the Trimui Brick. I'm actually in a retro playing group, and this is the game of the month. It's Golden Sun, to be played on Game Boy Advance. I've just gotten started. So at that time, what I wanted to do is kind of maybe play around with some of the adjustments and be able to get the best performance out of it as far as the image quality, as far as the video quality. Whoops, we lost our screen there. And what I was going to go ahead and do today is go ahead and get into that front-end emulator that's being used on there. So if you want to go ahead and pull out your bricks, follow along, and you will be able to create a better graphic experience with some tweaks and adjustments. Let's get started. So I'm going to go ahead and get back into my resume of my game, and I'm going to go ahead and press the Trimui button over here on the left to get to my menu. We're going to go down to the options. Sorry about that, we had a small little hiccup. As I mentioned, I was actually joined a Discord group, and we are actually playing, I will show you, Golden Sun. So what I'm going to go ahead and go and do today is, again, get into the emulator settings. So we're going to go ahead and press X for resume back to my game. We're going to go ahead and push the bottom left-hand little Trimui icon button. Brings up our menu. We're going to scroll down to Options, press A for OK. And you have another sub-menu there. It's the front end we're going to start with. So when we hit the front end, we go to the first menu item, which is screen scaling. So right now I currently have it as the aspect, but you have choices of native, full screen, aspect screen, and then back to aspect. So what we're going to do is I'm going to actually go back really quick, back out of the menu. Let's get out of here. I'm going to show you some images really quick that I was able to take off of the screen. We'll save this. We'll get out of here. We're going to go back to our menu, go down to Tools, go down to Gallery, and what I have is some images. This would be aspect ratio. This would show the image there. This is actually the native image. The aspect brings it a little bit in to fit the screen, and then if you have full screen, kind of 2 times the resolution and doesn't make it look very clear. So just to kind of give you an idea of those, you can decide what you like is best. Looks like aspect ratio and native seem to be about pretty much very similar, but I'm keeping it at aspect. I feel like that looks a little bit cleaner on my screen. So we'll go ahead and get back out of that. We'll go ahead and get back into the game. So I just wanted to kind of give you a briefing there of how that works. Go back into options. Front end scaling. Down below you've got audio resampling quality. So what that is basically the sound quality that's coming out of your speakers, what you're hearing from how the bitrate is on the video or the ROM from the video game. So there is settings of medium, high, max, and then low. Currently I'm sitting at medium. Medium actually is a good balance for real-time applications. If you want to go with the high or max, it's basically using a little bit more of the processor, and it could give it a little bit more quality, but it might have a higher pitch. So those are something that you could kind of sample and play with. We're going to scroll down to, you could have screen effects. Right now it's currently at none. You would have it with lines, or you could have it with grids. And if you save those options, you'll see the difference on the screen. It'll give it more of a little bit more pixelated. You can have the overlay, which is the framing like the Game Boy Advance, to kind of give you the similar to the original Game Boy Advance console. There's some screen settings. Go down below to the screen sharpness. You've got choices of nearest and linear. Nearest seems to be the more practical solution there. You can actually keep on going down. Now we've got the core sync. So what we have it down here is the core sync native uses the emulator frame rate. When the next one we have is it set as auto or screen. Screen uses the frame rate of the screen. You could set it at auto, and it basically is going to pick based on that Game Boy Advance ROM what would suit best for the image on the screen. For this one here, I've actually used the native, and it seems to give me the best functionality on its working. We're going to go down to the CPU speed. This was something I did a little bit of testing. I don't have the numbers, but if you were to get the frame rates up on the screen, you'll see that as well. So when it's set at auto, it's actually set at about running off of its processor in the Trimui Brick motherboard is about 1200 megahertz. That's about auto is what it's running there. If you were going to go to power save, it's also running at about 1200 megahertz, but it's good for saving on the battery. If you're using it for a long period of time during the day and you were playing intermittently. Next one is normal. Normal actually boosts it up to about 1600, kind of a little bit more above the balanced. And if you were to go to performance, it'll actually reach up to about 2000 megahertz. More for the gaming, more for some of the other emulated games on the Game Boy Advance that have more graphics. But it will use a little bit more battery, and you will feel in the back that the panel will get a little bit warmed up, so caution there. You can go down and you have the debug HUD. If you go ahead and turn that on, what it'll do is it'll show the frame rates per second, the load on the CPU, resolution, and scaler. There's a lot on the screen to show when you do that, so if you would like to go ahead and try that out, you're more than welcome to. We're going to go back out of the menu with the B. Now we're going to go down to the emulator, make a few tweaks there. So on the emulator, there's a few changings and settings that we have as well that you can make on it to make it just run a little bit better. Going down to the dynamic recompiler, what that means is that basically the data, when it's being cached, what it can be done is, if it's enabled, it causes it to eliminate the actually the machine code when it gets executed to be cached, so then it doesn't have to be retranslated again. So what it's doing is it's building up a cache, and it's not having to cycle over basically the process that the computer is going through. Below that, you have the no sprite limit, which again is probably suggested to be enabled. If you're not familiar with the sprite limit, it refers to the amount of a certain object that can be loaded in a level before the game will not produce anymore. So doing a little research on that, checking, if there was a sprite limit of 100, it could be 100 objects within that level of that game that would be used, and after that it would stop that. So it'd be best to kind of keep it at the no limit, which is enabled. Below is RTC support. RTC support actually stands for real-time clock. What that does is help for games if the game is using a real-time method for night and day. You'd want that enabled for some of the Nintendo games. So I went ahead and kept that enabled. I'm going to go down a little bit further, and the next one down we have is the frame skip. Right now I currently have it as disabled, which is the ideal and best option. What it's trying to do is the emulator will attempt to render every single frame of the game without skipping. The choices you also have is auto. Auto will monitor the CPU and basically work between rendering photos and the GPU process of how fast, so there is a possibility of some frame skips. That as well sits under the auto threshold. Means the emulator will monitor your system performance, how fast it's rendering frames. If the frame rate drops below a certain threshold, which the emulator usually determines automatically or allows you to set, if it's an advanced option, it will dynamically start skipping frames to try and maintain the game's original speed. Tries to balance the performance with visual quality. So these are things that you can check yourself. And then down below, the last resort is basically fixed interval. Basically, you will manually tell the emulator to skip a fixed number of frames, for example, maybe one every other frame, while it's running at half the original frame visually. And what it can do is give you some poor performance. So down below, in the threshold, we've got basically, if we were to go there, it would be about 33%. So about a third of it, we would be skipping frames. And down below, if it was an interval, it would be one skip per frame. So what we're going to do is kind of keep it at the disabled. It seems to be running really well there. We're going to go down below that, and we have color correction, interframe blending. Both of those, what I did was you can have enabled or disabled. So what I did was, let's go back, and I'm going to show you a couple pictures or images for a couple different settings that are on the color correction and the interframe blending. So we're going to go ahead and get out of this. Go ahead and do a save. Go ahead and do a quit. Get out of here. There we go. We're going to run ourselves back over to the tool menu. We're going to go to the gallery. Wrong button we're in. Let's get back to, there we are, the gallery. We're going to go over to our images again. I'll go back and I'll talk to you about scaling in a minute. So basically, if you had the color correction enabled and the interblend disabled, this is the image you're going to get, a little bit darker. And then if you were going to go disabled on the color correction and enabled on the interframe blending, you're going to get a little bit more of a lighter image, as you can see. So what we'll do is we'll go back. See, lighter image, darker image. So these are correct things that you can correct on here as well. And then the last thing, we'll go back to the menu, and it refers to, while I'm still on this screen, would be shaders. They're not strictly necessary to play Game Boy Advance games on an emulator, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you some examples over here. And what this would be the shader that could be used for the Game Boy image. As you can see here, light. So this would be the settings that you would use for the Game Boy shader. Then we're going to go with the Game Boy Advanced image. A little bit lighter, a little bit more clear. As you can see, here's the shader settings for the Game Boy Advance. And these are all preset in there. We'll go back one more time just to show you where that is. Then you can get it with the old TV image, a little bit more pixelated, a little bit darker. This shows also the settings. And again, these are all shown in that menu. You have an option of also sharp image, a little bit light. The settings, smooth image, as well as the settings. So we'll go ahead and get out of there. We'll go ahead and get back into the game one more time. Go ahead and resume. This one's a little bit darker, so let's see what we can do here is we'll make a change into our options. Going to go over to the shaders. We have it set at the Game Boy Advance. Go over here to we want this to be enabled, and we want this to be enabled, and we are going to go back. We're going to go with our shaders. We're going to go with the Game Boy Advance. We're going to go ahead and save our changes for the game. Go ahead and press OK. And see how you have a little bit darker brown. So what we'll do is we'll make one more change there, bring it a little bit lighter. Go back to the shaders. Go back to the emulator. And what you're going to do is you're going to disable the color correction. And you're going to disable the blending. We're going to save our changes one more time. And there's the lighter color. With that a little bit as well yourself. Anyway, well, that wraps it up. I hope I was able to provide some additional knowledge on the use of the Game Boy Advance emulator on the Trimui Brick running the NextUI custom firmware. And again, thanks for watching and happy gaming.